Have you ever poured your absolute soul into something? I'm talking blood, sweat, and sawdust. The kind of work that keeps you up until 3 o'clock a.m., meticulously calculating angles and obsessing over the grain of a $50 a foot piece of exotic wood. Have you ever created a masterpiece only to watch a swaggering, arrogant, talentless parasite of a boss literally erase your name, slap his own logo on your life's work, win a $500,000 contract, and then fire you in front of a dozen laughing men? Yeah, that happened to me. He told me, "This job is for the big boys. Go build birdhouses." Well, Greg, I didn't build birdhouses. I built a trap. And watching you walk right into it, watching your entire parasitic career burn to the ground while your boys begged me for a paycheck, that was the most beautiful thing I've ever crafted in my entire career. Welcome back to the Audacity of Him, guys. If you love seeing a narcissistic, sexist boss get it absolutely eviscerated and handed the karma he deserves, you're going to want to get comfortable for this one. My name is Danny. I'm a master carpenter, and I don't use that term lightly. In a world full of guys who think that buying a shiny new DeWalt drill makes them a craftsman, I'm the real deal. I specialize in high-end custom cabinetry, intricate millwork, and architectural trim. I don't just build boxes, I design seamless, flowing woodwork that makes multi-million-dollar homes look like they belong in a magazine. For 3 years, I worked for a general contractor named Greg. Let me paint a picture of Greg for you. Greg was a walking, talking cliche of everything wrong with the construction industry. He drove an immaculate, lifted Ford F-250 that had never seen a speck of dust or hauled a single piece of lumber. He wore designer steel-toe boots that didn't have a single scuff on them. He smelled like cheap cologne and stale Red Bull, and his hands were as soft as a baby's ass. Greg didn't build things, Greg talked. He was a salesman, a schmoozer, and a world-class manipulator. But Greg had a secret weapon that kept his luxury renovation business booming: me. Every time Greg bid on a high-end job, the kind of jobs where the clients wanted custom wine cellars, sweeping mahogany staircases, or library built-ins, he relied on me. He couldn't design a spice rack if his life depended on it. So I would sit down, consult with the clients, find out their general desires, and draw up the most breathtaking, meticulously calculated blueprints you've ever seen. I did it by hand first, feeling the space. And then I translated it into CAD software. I spent hours selecting the right wood species, matching grains, and engineering the structural supports so everything looked like it was floating. I won him those bids. My designs were the closing pitch, and my hands were the ones that actually built the final product. So you'd think I'd be treated like gold, right? Wrong. I was actively hidden. Greg hated letting the rich clients see me. He was terrified that if they realized a 28-year-old woman in sawdust-covered Carhartts was the actual genius behind their luxury upgrades, they'd question why they were paying Greg a 40% markup just to stand around pointing at things. He severely underpaid me. I was making a fraction of what a master carpenter and lead designer should be making in this market. And the workplace environment? It was a toxic wasteland. Greg purposely fostered a culture of pure, unadulterated 1950s-era sexism among his all-male crew. The framing guys, the drywallers, the painters. They took their cues from him. Every single day was a gauntlet of microaggressions and outright disrespect. If I pointed out a safety hazard on the site, Greg would roll his eyes, look at the framing crew, and say loudly, "Careful, boys! Danny's getting emotional with the nail gun again. Must be that time of the month. Let's give her some space before she cries over a bent framing stud." The crew, Guys like Smitty, a mouth-breathing drywaller, and Dave, a framer who couldn't cut a straight line with a laser guide, would roar with laughter. They treated me like a mascot, a novelty. They constantly second-guessed my measurements, tried to mansplain basic joinery to me, and routinely left their trash on my pristine sanded work surfaces. Why did I stay? I know you're screaming that at the screen right now. Why didn't I walk? Because, like many women, I was trapped. I had student loans from my design degree. My mother had just gone through expensive medical treatments that I was helping pay for, and the local unions in my specific county were notoriously difficult to break into without a sponsor. Greg, for all his fault, provided a steady paycheck. I put my head down, swallowed the bile in my throat, and focused on the wood. The wood didn't care about my gender. The wood only cared about the skill. And then came the Grandview Hotel project. This was the holy grail. A massive, historic boutique hotel downtown was undergoing a massive renovation. The owners wanted a complete overhaul of the lobby, the main bar, and the penthouse suites. They wanted old-world craftsmanship mixed with modern elegance. It was a $500,000 finishing contract. It was the kind of job that makes a company's reputation for a decade. Greg was salivating, but he was also terrified because he knew he was completely out of his depth. He came to me uncharacteristically sweet. "Danny girl," he said, slapping me on the shoulder. "We need this one. I need you to pull out all the stops. Draw up the most incredible bar and lobby trim package you've ever conceived. I'm talking Architectural Digest level." I saw an opportunity. If I do this, Greg, and we win the bid, I want a 15% raise, and I want to be named the official lead site manager for the finishing phase. No more hiding me in the shop. He didn't even blink. "Done. You got it. Just win me this bid." I poured my absolute soul into that design. For 3 weeks, I barely slept. I drafted a sprawling 30-foot wraparound bar using rare, reclaimed Bubinga wood, an exotic African rosewood that is notoriously difficult to work with but yields a finish that looks like liquid fire. I designed custom hand-carved corbels, integrated LED lighting hidden within complex crown molding, and a library area with floor-to-ceiling walnut bookcases featuring rolling ladders and hidden compartments. It was my magnum opus. Every measurement, every joint, every structural load was calculated to perfection. I stamped the bottom of every single CAD file and hand-drawn blueprint with my signature and my personal design watermark. I handed the portfolio over to Greg on a Tuesday morning. The presentation to the hotel owners was that afternoon. I wore a clean shirt ready to go with him to explain the intricate joinery. "Whoa, whoa," Greg said, blocking the door to his truck. "Where do you think you're going?" "To the presentation," I said, confused. "To explain the structural requirements for the Bubinga bar." Greg scoffed. "Danny, these are high-level corporate investors. They want to see the face of the company, a guy in a suit. No offense, but you look like you just crawled out of a lumber mill. You'll spook 'em. I've got this. Go back and sand those baseboards for the Henderson house." I was furious, but I backed down. Just get the bid, I told myself. Get the bid, get the raise, get the title. 2 days later, Greg strutted onto the job site holding a bottle of cheap champagne. He had the crew gather around. "Boys," he shouted, popping the cork. "We got it! $500,000! The Grandview is ours!" The crew cheered. Smitty howled like a baboon. Dave pounded his hammer against a stud. I felt a surge of pride. My designs had done it. I walked up to Greg, wiping sawdust from my hands. "That's amazing, Greg," I said. "So, about my new title and that raise." Greg looked at me. His smile vanished, replaced by a cold, condescending smirk. He took a sip of his champagne. "Yeah, about that, Danny," he sighed, running a hand through his over-gelled hair. "Look, the clients love the pitch. but this is a commercial job. It's a whole different beast. It requires heavy lifting, aggressive timelines, and, frankly, a firm hand on the site. He gestured to the driveway. A beat-up, rusty Chevy Silverado pulled in. Out stepped a guy I recognized immediately. Chad. He was Greg's weekend drinking buddy. A guy who had been fired from 3 different job sites in the past year for showing up drunk and botching drywall. "I brought Chad on as the lead site manager," Greg announced, his voice carrying so the whole crew could hear. "He's got the alpha energy we need to push this through." My stomach plummeted into my boots. Chad? Greg, Chad doesn't know the difference between a dovetail joint and a wood screw. He's a hack. And what about my designs? Who's going to execute my blueprints? "Ah," Greg said. He reached into his truck and pulled out a roll of blueprints. My blueprints. He unrolled them. I stared in horror. My signature block had been digitally scrubbed. My watermark was gone. In the bottom right corner, bold in black, it read, "Designed by Gregory Contracting, lead designer, Gregory Masterson." "What did you do?" I yelled, my voice cracking. "You stole my files! You stole my designs!" "Calm down, sweetheart. You're getting hysterical," Greg said, rolling his eyes as the crew began to snicker. "You drafted them on company time. They belong to the company. And honestly, Danny, I've been thinking, your energy just isn't right for this crew anymore. You're too sensitive. You complain too much about the boys just having a little fun." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a final paycheck. "I'm letting you go, Danny. No hard feelings. But this job, this is for the big boys. Chad and the guys will take it from here." He actually patted me on the head, like a dog. "Go build birdhouses, Danny. It's more your speed." The silence on the site was deafening, broken only by Dave, who let out a loud, mocking laugh. "See ya, bird girl!" Smitty chimed in. "Don't forget your emotional support nail gun." I stood there, vibrating with a rage so pure and hot I thought I was going to burst into flames. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just looked at Greg, then at Chad, who was already scratching his gut and looking confusedly at the blueprints. I took the check. I packed my tools into my truck. Every single clamp, every chisel, my Japanese pull saws. I made sure I didn't leave so much as a stray pencil behind. The drive home was a blur of utter, soul-crushing angst. When I finally got to my apartment, I collapsed. I was broke. I was unemployed. The medical bills were due next week. And worst of all, the most agonizing part of it all, I had to live with the knowledge that my beautiful, intricate designs, my magnum opus, was about to be absolutely butchered by a bunch of incompetent, careless amateurs. The Bubinga wood alone required specialized carbide-tipped blades and exact moisture control. Chad was going to hack it to pieces with a dull circular saw. I sat on my couch in the dark for hours. The feeling of powerlessness was suffocating. I am a woman in the trades. I knew exactly what would happen if I complained on social media or tried to tell other contractors. I'd be labeled the crazy, emotional chick who couldn't hack it. Greg would spin the story. He would win. He always won. But as the sun started to come up, illuminating the dust motes in my living room, the despair faded. It was replaced by something else, something sharp. I am a master carpenter. I don't whine, I dismantle, I deconstruct, and I find the structural weaknesses. Greg had a massive structural weakness. He was an idiot who didn't understand the law, and he didn't understand the materials he was working with. I opened my laptop. First, I checked the local building codes and state contractor licensing board. I looked up Chad. Just as I suspected, Chad had a basic Class C residential handyman license. He was absolutely, explicitly not licensed or bonded for commercial structural finish work in a public hotel. Installing load-bearing, massive suspended wooden structures above a public bar without the proper commercial license was a massive code violation. Second, the blueprints. Greg thought he was clever by digitally scrubbing my PDF files. But Greg is a dinosaur who doesn't understand metadata. I had hand-drawn the original sketches in my physical notebook, which was sitting on my desk. More importantly, I used my personal AutoCAD software license to draft the files. I had time-stamped, version-controlled cloud backups of every single keystroke and line I drew, weeks before Greg slapped his name on the final PDF. I had the paper trail. I had the licensing violations. I didn't need to sue Greg. That would take years. I needed to annihilate him. Now. I picked up the phone and called the corporate office of the Grandview Hotel. I didn't ask for a secretary. I used my knowledge of the project to ask directly for Mr. Sterling and Ms. Hayes, the lead investors. "My name is Danny," I told the executive assistant. "I am the actual architect and designer of the Grandview lobby renovation. Greg Masterson committed corporate fraud. He is using an unlicensed labor that will void your commercial insurance, and I have the digital forensics to prove it. I need 10 minutes with the owners." 2 hours later, I was walking into a glass-paneled boardroom on the 40th floor of a downtown high-rise. I didn't wear a suit. I wore my clean Carhartts and my steel toes. Mr. Sterling, a severe-looking man in his 60s, and Ms. Hayes, a razor-sharp woman in her 40s, looked at me skeptically. "Ms. Danny," Ms. Hayes said, "you're making some incredibly serious accusations against a contractor we just wrote a very large deposit check to." "I know," I said. I dropped my massive leather-bound sketchbook onto the mahogany table. It landed with a heavy thud. I opened it. "Here are the original hand-drawn concept sketches for your lobby, dated 4 months ago. Note the specific notation about the Bubinga wood grain direction." I pulled out my laptop and turned the screen around. "Here is the AutoCAD file. Notice the digital timestamp from 3 weeks ago. Now, notice the author metadata embedded in the file." I clicked a button. "Author, Danny, license, student edition registered to my name." Sterling and Hayes leaned in. Their expressions shifted from skepticism to dark, brewing anger. "Greg Masterson stole my intellectual property, presented it as his own, and fired me the day you awarded the contract," I continued, my voice steady, cold, and professional. "But that is my personal problem. Your problem is who he replaced me with." I slid a printed document across the table. "This is the state contractor database profile for Chad, the man Greg put in charge of your site. He does not hold a commercial structural license. If he installs the suspended canopy over your bar and it falls on a guest, your insurance company will look at his license and they will deny your claim. You will be sued into oblivion." Ms. Hayes pinched the bridge of her nose. Mr. Sterling's face had turned a deep shade of purple. "Furthermore," I added, twisting the knife, 2 days ago, Greg took delivery of $30,000 worth of raw Bubinga wood. It is one of the hardest, most brittle exotic woods on the planet. It requires specialized tools, specific acclimatization, and a master's touch. If Chad touches that wood, he will destroy it." Ms. Hayes stood up immediately. "Get my car," she barked to her assistant. She looked at me. "Danny, you are coming with us. We are doing a surprise walkthrough of the site, right now." When we pulled up to the Grandview Hotel, the site was a chaotic mess. Classic Greg. Trash everywhere, loud music blaring from a battered boombox, guys standing around smoking. Greg was leaning against his pristine truck drinking a coffee. When he saw the sleek black town car pull up, he immediately puffed out his chest and put on his best salesman smile. "Mr. Sterling, Ms. Hayes!" Greg boomed, walking toward us with his arms wide open. "What a pleasant surprise! We are just getting the boys fired up for the day." His voice died in his throat as I stepped out of the car right behind them. Greg's jaw literally dropped. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a ghost. Danny? What the hell are you doing here? Ms. Hayes didn't even say hello. She marched right past him, her heels clicking aggressively on the concrete, straight into the main lobby. Sterling and I followed closely. Greg scrambled after us, suddenly sweating profusely. Ms. Hayes, wait! The site isn't prepped for a tour. We need hard hats. We walked into the main lobby space, and my heart stopped. There, in the center of the room, were the massive, beautiful slabs of rare Bubinga wood, and standing over them was Chad, holding a standard, dull framing circular saw. He had already made 3 cuts. I didn't even need to walk closer. I could see the massive, jagged splinters. He hadn't taped the cut lines. He hadn't used a scoring blade. He had just rammed a cheap, low-tooth blade through $30,000 worth of exotic wood, causing catastrophic tear out. The wood was absolutely ruined, shredded beyond repair. It looked like a beaver had chewed through it. Stop! I screamed. Chad jumped, dropping the saw. The blade guard clanged loudly. He looked at us, wiping sweat from his forehead, looking completely lost. What the hell is going on here? Mr. Sterling roared, his voice echoing off the bare drywall. Greg was hyperventilating. Sir, it's fine. It's just a rough cut. We're gonna sand it down. You can't sand out a 3-inch tear out on a finished edge, you absolute hack, I fired back, not holding back anymore. I walked up to the wood and ran my hand over the butchered edge. I looked at Ms. Hayes. This slab is dead. He just destroyed $10,000 in material in 5 minutes. Ms. Hayes looked from the ruined wood to Chad and finally to Greg. Her eyes were like ice. Greg, she said quietly. It was the kind of quiet that makes the hairs on your arms stand up. Who is this man? She pointed at Chad. That's Chad. He's my lead guy, Greg stammered, his confident facade completely shattered. He looked pathetic, a small, weak man caught in his own web of lies. Does Chad hold a commercial structural finishing license? She asked. Well, he works under my umbrella. Does he hold the license? Ms. Hayes enunciated every single word like a gunshot. Greg swallowed hard. No. And did you design these blueprints, Greg? She pulled a copy of the stolen blueprints out of her designer bag and threw them onto the floor at his feet. Greg looked at me. His eyes were pleading. The arrogant, sexist pig who told me to go build birdhouses was suddenly begging me with his eyes to save him. We collaborated, he choked out. You parasitic fraud, Mr. Sterling spat. You lied to our investors. You provided fraudulent documents. You brought unlicensed, uninsured labor onto a commercial site, and you have actively destroyed our materials. Sir, please, I can fix this. We can order more wood. You aren't ordering anything, Ms. Hayes interrupted. You are fired, Greg, effective immediately. You are in breach of contract. Our legal team is drafting the paperwork as we speak. We are suing you for the return of the deposit, for the cost of the ruined materials, and for fraud. I will personally make sure your name is blacklisted from every commercial developer in this state. Now get off my property before I have you arrested for trespassing. I watched Greg break. He physically deflated. He looked around at his crew. Smitty, Dave, the guys who had just laughed at me, they were standing in the corner, silent, eyes wide with panic. They knew their paychecks had just evaporated. Greg didn't say another word. He turned, his shoulders slumped, and walked out to his spotless truck. He drove away, and with him, his entire company dissolved into dust. Ms. Hayes took a deep breath, smoothing her jacket. She turned to me. The anger vanished, replaced by a sharp business acumen. Danny, she said, we have a hotel to open in 4 months. We have a lobby that needs your designs. If we hire you directly, bypassing the general contractor model, can you fix this? I looked at the ruined wood. I looked at the massive empty space, and I smiled. Yes, ma'am, I can. But my rate just went up. I require a 30% advance to source replacement materials, and I have complete, unquestioned authority over who I hire for my crew. Nobody steps foot on this site without my approval. Ms. Hayes held her hand out. You're the lead site manager now, Danny. Get to work. Fast forward 1 month. The Grandview site was humming, but it sounded different. There was no blaring, obnoxious radio. There was no yelling, no crude jokes, no trash left on the tables. It was a symphony of precision. The smell of fresh, properly cut wood filled the air. I was standing by the newly constructed, flawless Burbinga bar frame, reviewing a CAD file on my tablet when the heavy main doors banged open. All right, who's running this circus? A painfully familiar, obnoxious voice boomed. I turned around. It was Greg, but he looked completely different from a month ago. The immaculate designer clothes were gone, replaced by a rumpled, stained shirt. The lifted Ford F-250 outside was missing, repoed probably, and he had pulled up in a rusted sedan. He smelled like cheap liquor, stale sweat, and pure desperation. He strutted onto the site, trying to puff out his chest and act like he still belonged there, but he just looked pathetic. Greg, I said, my voice carrying cleanly over the hum of the tools, you have exactly 10 seconds to get off my site before I have you arrested for trespassing. He scoffed, marching aggressively right up to me. Your site? This was my contract, you little thief. I came to speak to the owners. I'm getting my job back and I'm taking over. I laughed out loud. With what license, Greg? Chad's handyman permit? Or maybe your alpha energy is gonna magically replace the 30 grand in exotic wood you let your buddy destroy? You're bankrupt, you're a fraud, and you're standing on my floor. The site had gone completely quiet. The symphony of tools had stopped. My crew was watching. Greg's face turned violently purple. The public humiliation cracked whatever fragile, arrogant ego he had left. He lunged forward and grabbed my arm, his thick fingers digging into my bicep like a vice. Listen to me, you ungrateful little, he snarled, leaning in so close I could smell the alcohol on his breath. You think you can ruin my life? I'll make sure you never work in this town again. I'll break your damn hands. He didn't get to finish that sentence. I didn't scream. I didn't pull away or act scared. I just shifted my weight, swung my heavy steel-toed work boot up, and kicked him straight between the legs, right where it counts, brutally hard. The sound that came out of him wasn't a yell. It was a satisfying, high-pitched, wheezing squeak. His grip instantly vanished as his hands flew to his groin. He collapsed to his knees, his eyes bulging out of his head, gasping for air like a fish out of water. Around us, the sound of half a dozen pneumatic nail guns clicking off their safeties echoed through the lobby. Sarah, my master framer, stepped out from behind a partition, a heavy framing hammer resting casually on her shoulder. Maria, my lead drywaller, flanked her holding a utility knife. Boss, Sarah said, her voice ice cold as she stared daggers at Greg. Do we need to take out the trash? I looked down at Greg, who was now curled into the fetal position on my pristine floor, groaning in agony. No, I said loudly. He was just leaving. It took him a good 5 minutes to crawl to his feet and hobble humiliatingly out the door, clutching his stomach. We watched him drive away, and then the tools fired right back up. I took a breath, adjusted my shirt, and went back to my tablet. Not even an hour later, I heard an awkward throat clearing behind me. I turned around. Standing there, holding their hard hats, looking incredibly awkward, were Smitty and Dave, Greg's old crew. Hey, Danny, Smitty mumbled, looking at his boots. Looking good in here. Crazy that Greg just showed up like that. What do you want, Smitty? I asked, not looking up from my tablet. Well, Dave chimed in, shuffling to his feet. Word is Greg filed for bankruptcy. His wife left him, and he's facing a massive lawsuit. He completely went under, and obviously he's lost his mind. We haven't worked in a month. We heard you took over as the big boss here. We were wondering if maybe you needed some framers or drywall guys. We know the site. I lowered my tablet. I looked at Dave. I looked at Smitty. I remembered the laughter. I remembered the birdhouse comment. I remembered the years of absolute disrespect. You guys need a job? I asked, my voice dripping with faux sympathy. They both nodded eagerly. Yeah, real bad, Danny. We got bills. I smiled. It was a cold, predatory smile. Sorry, boys, I said, my voice ringing out clearly across the quiet lobby. This job is for the professionals. I pointed over to the scaffolding. Hey, Sarah, I called out. Sarah lowered her nail gun and looked down. Yeah, boss? And Maria, I yelled toward the library area. Maria popped her head out. What's up, Danny? I looked back at Smitty and Dave. Their jaws were slightly open. They were looking around the site, finally realizing something. Every single person working on my site, the framers, the electricians, the painters, was a woman. I had reached out to the local Women in Trades chapter and hired the most elite, meticulous, hardworking female crew in the tri-state area. As you can see, boys, I said, leaning in close so only they could hear, my roster is full. We don't have room for hacks. We don't leave trash around. And we definitely don't have time for guys getting emotional with a nail gun. I hear there's a development down the road looking for some manual laborers to haul trash. Maybe that's more your speed. I gave them the exact same patronizing head pat Greg had given me. Go build birdhouses, boys. Now get the hell off my site. Watching them walk away, heads hung low, humiliated and unemployed, was the best finish I've ever applied to any job. The Grandview Hotel opened on time. The Bubinga Bar was featured in Architectural Digest. My company, Ironwood Custom Carpentry, now has a 2-year waiting list for luxury clients. And Greg? I hear he's working the graveyard shift at a big box hardware store in the plumbing aisle. Sometimes you just have to burn the whole thing down to build something beautiful in its place. Thank you so much for listening, guys. If you loved watching a toxic boss get exactly what he deserved, please absolutely smash that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already, and leave a comment down below. What is the craziest thing a boss has ever tried to steal from you? I read all your comments. Until next time, keep your tools sharp and take no prisoners. See you next time!